Good morning, everybody. Sorry. Welcome back after the summer. It's very nice to see everyone. It is really, genuinely, really nice to be back at the Skills Committee. So it's very good to be here. We have one absent. We have two apologies, in fact. We have Councillor Chris Seaton from Fenland District Council and Councillor Sam Wakeford from Huntingdon District Council, who are not present this morning. That means that we are quorate, but that if anybody needs to go, we will no longer be quorate. So if there's anybody who needs to leave early or is not able to stay for the full session, if they could let me know, and we'll make sure that we've got any decisions made before that. Councillor MacDonald.
I ideally need to do a work call at 12 o'clock.
We'll try and make sure we've got all the business done before that. so that's helpful to know in the circumstances. So thank you very much. I think I've welcomed members of the committee. I would also like to welcome any members of the press and public who have joined us today or who are watching the meeting on our live stream. The Combined Authority allows filming and photography at its public meetings, so please feel free to take pictures or tweet during the meeting. If I could ask, though, that everybody turns their mobile phones to silent or vibrate while the meeting is taking place. There are no fire drills scheduled for today, so if the alarm sounds, I will adjourn the meeting and we will move to the muster point, which is in the High Street. And if I could remind members and officers that the meeting will be recorded. I think we've done the apologies for absence, so we'll move on to the next bit. Does any member of the committee wish to declare a disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory interest in any of the items being considered today? I see no indications. If there are if any come up during the meeting, feel free to just say at that point, because occasionally things do, but that's fine. The item 2.3 on the agenda, multiply the approach to programme delivery. Following the report to the Combined Authority Board on the 8th of June about the multiply programme, the Combined Authority had expected to receive a grant funding letter. At the time of writing to the report for the Skills Committee, the grant funding letter for the DFE had not yet been received, and correspondence from the DFE had indicated that the Combined Authority would receive notification in the week commencing the 29th of August. Given the timelines for delivery within this financial year, it was critical to get the necessary approvals and delegations to proceed with awarding grants and contracts to maximise the delivery of learning within the financial year and prevent the risk of underperformance. The Combined Authority had subsequently been notified that to ensure payment could be processed in September 2022, the grant funding agreement would need to be signed and returned by Friday the 2nd of September for payment to be received in September to support the delivery of the Multiply programme. The special urgency procedures set out in the Constitution were therefore enacted to meet these deadlines, and the report was taken directly to the Board on the 31st of August for approval. Therefore, this report on the agenda is now for noting. So we'll move on to the approval of the minutes and the action log, which is item 1.2 on the agenda. We're being asked to confirm the minutes as a correct record. Does any member wish to raise a question on the accuracy of the minutes? I don't see any objections, so we will take the minutes as approved, and we'll move on to the action log. So, oh, sorry, Lynn.
I'm sorry, I hadn't realised you were going to approve them. Are you going to have questions now?
We'll move on to the action log on the minutes.
There's one that I'm not sure is on the action log, and it was something about the deep dive panel.
Okay.
Is that okay? Because I don't think that's one of the actions, because it doesn't say action against it. And I just wondered why it was taking so long to do this deep dive into the adult education situation, because it began in, I think it was February, and it's not going to come forth as information for us until November. That seemed an awfully long time.
Fliss, do you want to do what I was going to do was to move to the action log and let you introduce it. So if you could do that and then pick up that point within your introduction, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Okay, so if we go to the action log now and go through all the different actions, is that okay? So therefore I'll take your question now, Councillor Ayres. So the deep dive has been going through an iterative process, and so therefore the deep dive was instigated under John Hill, who is no longer with us, and as the months have gone by, it's taken a different focus to get more, for it to be more meaningful. And so therefore it is intending to come back in November. So therefore there is a report, there is a draft report which we can circulate prior to the meeting in November, if that would be helpful to see that at this stage. So there has been a report that has been reported on. I just wanted to make sure that there was additional information to be included to make it more meaningful.
If there is a draft report, it would be quite useful just to see what's being said. That's just
more than
quite
happy
a long
to
time.
circulate.
That's,
Yeah,
thank you.
Totally fine. And then in relation to the other actions, you will have seen this morning that there's been some further actions from Steve Clark, and so the only action that's currently in progress is the one assigned to Councillor Nessinger about the letter being drafted, which has been undertaken by an officer that we need to send. Apart from that, all of the actions have been completed and willing to take any questions on those actions.
Any further questions on the action log? And an apology from me for being a little slow over the summer with that letter, but it will be sent very soon. Okay, thank you very much. We will move on from that item. And I think the next item is 1.3, public questions. We've received a number of questions from the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. A copy of the questions has been circulated to members in advance of the meeting. We will take the questions and the responses at the start of the relevant item on the agenda. The next item on the agenda is item 2.1, which is the adult education budget, which is due to be introduced by Parminder, who I think may not be here yet. Is that right, Fliss?
So he is online. He can't access the meeting, so I'm just looking to resend the link to him. So
Do you want to take, he's doing most of the next few items, so do you want us to take a couple of minutes pause while we try and
if
get
that's
him up?
okay,
Yeah, so
please.
we'll just pause a minute and we'll try and get Parminder online rather than, if it takes too long, we might move to another agenda item. But it's a bit frustrating if he's there and he can't do it. Our patience is rewarded. There it's Parminder on the screen. Good morning, Parminder. Can you hear us? We can just. You're a bit quiet, so I don't know if it's possible to But yes, we can hear you, so that's fine. So if you're happy to start and introduce the item 2.1, the Adult Education Budget Contract Awards. Actually, we could take... No, let's have Parminder's introduction and then we'll go to the overview and scrutiny question. So thank you, Parminder.
Successful, and many of the new AUB providers have a footprint or existing delivery within our sub-region, either through subcontracting or delivering for other funders. Contract negotiations with all of the providers have been completed, and this included consideration of strategic fit. That includes geographic targeting, curriculum specialism, local partnership working, employer engagement, avoiding duplication, and of course, supporting disadvantaged groups and wider social value outputs. So the report notes the lack of applications from local third sector organisations, and therefore further partnership working with the local councils for voluntary services is underway to co-design a different approach for commissioning suitable voluntary and community sector providers as well. So to summarise, we've had a successful procurement process. This has resulted in a better mixed and diverse set of providers, which we expect will give us the necessary capacity to grow participation in learning and improve the skills of our citizens. Happy to take any questions from members.
Thank you very much indeed, Parminder. I'm just going to go to the overview and scrutiny question and the formal response to it, but I'm very happy for you to also ask Parminder a question if you want to follow up from what I've said. So the question from the overview and scrutiny committee, do you want to read it out?
If I may, Chair, yes, perhaps I could it's about 2.6 and 2.7 of 2.1, which is about the increase in the number of providers, which is great to see because we crashed, I think, from 190 to 17, and it's been recognised that was probably too much. And so what we're interested in the Oversight and Scrutiny Committee is to make sure that there's adequate provision. Part of that was looking at the increase, which is good to see, although that there are other questions about these companies that are being involved and how local they might be, but that's not the question I'm asking. What we're interested in is that there was, I think there's a total of, was it 6 dropped out, 1 disqualified and 5 were unable to complete an application. And our concern was if they were dropping out because they hadn't been given sufficient information that they could improve their offer to make sure they could take part. Just some reassurance, really, that an adequate support was given for these individual organisations to be able to make an effective bid. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and for the surrounding information, which was really helpful. So the formal response is that all unsuccessful applicants are always offered feedback on their application and on how they could improve future applications. The Adult Education Board and Skills Bootcamp teams have been working together to see whether any of the unsuccessful bidders could be suitable to deliver the skills bootcamps, and discussions are ongoing. This is due to being oversubscribed for the AEB procurement. So I hope that's helpful, but if you would like more information, I'm sure Parminder would be happy to answer any a supplementary question if you'd like.
Thank you. Yes, I was just looking at the new providers that have been brought on, and my only concern was that I researched all of them to have a look at where they're located, and some of them don't seem to have a footprint within Cambridgeshire or Peterborough. I was just wondering whether part of that proposal was that they would be set locally, or whether we're talking here about online learning, for example, that can be delivered anywhere.
Parminder, are you happy to respond to that, or if you are, that would be great. If you want to have a bit more time, we can get a written response.
I think, as I mentioned in the introduction, that as part of the contract negotiation process, and also as part of the application process, all of the bidders had to specify where they're going to be delivering and who the partnerships that they'll be working with. So so in terms of geographic spread, that has been undertaken as part of the assessment, but also as part of the contract negotiations. Some of them already have a footprint. Some of them are working. They intend to work in local venues. Some of them are also delivering blended learning. So I think when we look at the commission across the board, I think we'll have a much better coverage, geographical coverage, than what we've had previously. And then the other thing to add is that as part of the contract negotiations, we've also been talking to providers about what I call a hive of delivery. So while we do not want to put any sort of postcode lottery type of arrangements in place for providers at all, that's not the intention, but it's about how they concentrate delivery and outreach in specific areas. And given the work that's been undertaken as part of the employment and skills strategy around skills needs, the providers will be aligned on that basis. So as part of the contract setup process, which will kick off, that will be, we'll go into more detail in terms of the specific locations and ensuring that we're minimizing duplication and really focusing the providers to where there is the need for provision.
That's very reassuring, thank you. I picked up that there's one in Raunds, one in Chelmsford and one in Yorkshire, and I couldn't find anything local yet that was specified on their websites. I appreciate this is early days, but it would be good to know where it is that they're located and which community they're serving in our area. Thank you very much, Parminder.
Thank you very much, and points definitely noted. We'll pick those up. Liz, sorry.
That one works, doesn't it? So, yes, good morning, Parminder. I hope you've had a good holiday, or whether, I think you're probably still on it, actually. So, yes, we do note the progress that we've made, and there's one or two comments that I want to make. You've already picked up the location issue, which I was concerned about. Trying to look at this as the whole picture of reaching our hard-to-reach participants, from the macro to the micro. Quite concerned that the third sector are not represented in quite the same way, and I note that there's going to be a report about this, but I think this is quite key and quite critical. For example, we've just introduced, thanks to Parminder, a new provider into SOAM in East Cambs. We know that we will not get those courses off the ground unless SOAM residents and councillors and all the organisations in SOAM work with that provider to get those people into those courses. So what concerns me is that we've had underspends before because we've not been able to fill courses, and you talk about Cambridge Skills, which I understand still has an underspend. So I am really, really concerned that actually we might put on more courses, that they may be available, but actually getting people onto those courses is something that needs to be done on the ground. And at the moment, I can't see a strategy where that includes the cold spots, not just East Cambridge, but the ones you've identified, the areas. We have stats of where the cold spots are. How we can actually work with you to engage on this, because this is what we're here for, and we can do work on the ground with that in our own patches. So still concerned about getting people into those courses. Don't know whether you want to comment on that. I think I've asked the question before. So.
Thank you, Paminda.
I think we share your concerns, and which is why we procured in the way that we have, in terms of identifying, ensuring the alignment with the skills strategy, ensuring that we have provision that is more targeted. So if you compare this procurement with the previous procurement in 2019, which was about generic AEB and not really focusing on specific cohorts in the way that we've done it this time, we hope that through that process that will help. But the other tool that we have, of course, is around contract management and how we direct the providers to work with the communities of interest, and also the geographies of interest, but also the sectors that we want them to work with as well. So I would see that a function now post-procurement to be part of the contract management, and definitely welcome the opportunity to work in greater co-production with our constituent councils, as we are doing, with the example that Councillor Every highlighted. But as you say, there's a lot more work that we need to do. So this is very much the beginning of the process and the beginning of the relationship with these providers. So I think in terms of the coming years, it's about how we get those providers how we direct those providers to really work with those communities that we want to. So at this stage, what I would say is that we welcome any of the local insights and any of the local partnerships that we can put together as part of the onboarding process of the providers, and we look forward to continually working with all of our local stakeholders to ensure that we have a successful launch of these providers. And then the other work with the voluntary and community sector, we will, again, as I said, we'll bring some further thoughts, how we're working, how we'll be informed with the Council of Voluntary Services. That work is actually ongoing. It's already started before this academic year. We've been in conversation with them, but it's now about how we crystallise that into a commissioning process, to work with those suitable providers in the third sector that we can.
Thank you, Lynn.
Lynn. Thank you. Yeah, Parmin, I'm too delighted that you've got a lot of people engaged in this. A lot of people came forward. I think that's really good, and I'm sure that you've had quite a time picking through them and deciding who can have them. But I was interested to see that, because I think our grant providers have 1-year contracts, don't they? And I did see that although there's a break clause, these are going to run on an annual basis with a break clause for a 5-year period. And that seemed quite a long period to me, for people, some of whom you don't know, I think. We haven't worked with them before. And I think that's my main concern about how you're going to make sure that when they get going, and you've given them these contracts, how are you going to manage them and the quality of provision that they provide? Because are you going to do spot checks, or how do you go about it? That's what I really want to know, because I'm sure with the providers you already know, and that's good, you've got some of those. But the ones that you don't know, how do you make sure that they're going to do the job for us for that length of time? I've got another question as well after that, if I can, please. Yes, well, my other question really was about the voluntary organisations, which I saw in 210, and I think these third sector organisations who they subcontract with the AEB providers, particularly Cambridgeshire Skills, it is said. So because of course if they don't deal with it through a grant provider, they would have to be Ofsteded, wouldn't they? And wouldn't that be very difficult for them? So could you just explain that to me as well, please?
Thank you very much. Good questions. Thank you. Parminder, if you're happy to respond, that would be great.
Yeah, I think I think to answer the first question, I'd have to go into some significant detail. So what I would propose to do is whether we can, because we do publish our contract management and performance management process, is that maybe we could take that as an action in terms of the contract management process, so that members have more of a deeper understanding in terms of how all that works, because there's quite a lot of detail I would need to walk members through. And I'm very happy to do that and to go into that detail. So, Chair, if you're happy for me to take that as an action, I'd be delighted to go through that process and to take feedback on it as well. And then the second question was about voluntary and community sector providers, and as Councillor Ayres has highlighted, that Ofsted is one of the challenges. And providers being subject to Ofsted inspection as one of the conditions of having their own contracts. I think that is one of the constraints. But I think there are other constraints around capacity of voluntary and community organisations to go through procurement processes, and also to meet some of the data management and contract management requirements. Which is why they've tended to go through a subcontracting arrangement. So I think what I would say is that we're planning on bringing a further paper to the committee, setting out a proposal in partnership with the CVSs. So I think I'd like to take again the detail of that as part of that paper, if that's okay with members. But just to say that the concerns that you highlighted are shared, and which is why we've highlighted them in the paper as well, that we do want to see more of our local providers accessing funding, and particularly where we recognise that those providers are best placed to work with some of our more disadvantaged and more vulnerable organisations, but also in rural communities where perhaps some of the bigger providers may not have the economies of scale to make provision viable, but local organisations have the reach and the capacity. So I think it's about how do we use our flexibilities as the devolved authority to work more creatively to address some of those constraints and barriers that those organisations face.
Thank you, Parminder. I think Fliss would like to say a couple of things as well. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to come in on the first point, Parminder, and I think it's probably useful to note now that grant providers are paid on profile, where contracted providers are paid on performance. And so therefore there's a very different mechanism to manage performance of both providers. So there are tighter controls for our ITPs. So I think that's useful to say now, and then we can come back to you with more detailed information.
Thank you for that. Because the other thing that I'd noticed was mention of a learner support fund for the people with learning difficulties, disabilities, etc., in the adult. But I think that goes out to the adult education providers. And what I'm sorry, this is another question actually. You'll have to forgive me, Lucy. And I just wondered if that was always used up by the adult education providers, because of course that's a very important area nowadays, because we have so many people who not only are disabled but have learning difficulties, and we know about it, and we're having a lot of difficulty in the schools, etc. And of course with the young people. So if somebody could just help me over that, just to say whether we're actually spending it all, let's put it that way, and how much is it?
Sorry, Fliss, did you? Okay, Parminder, if you're happy to if you have the detail off the top of your head, that's fine. If not, a response after the meeting is also very helpful.
I think in terms of, I think the first question about are we spending it? What we don't do at the moment is we do not ring fence it. So in order to provide our providers, whether they're grant funded or whether they are contracted providers, we don't ring fence the learner support funds. So they determine themselves based on learner need what the spend is going to be. And the reason we don't ring fence it is because we want to provide them with the flexibility and for funding not to be used as a reason not to provide support, if that makes sense. So there is a notional amount in terms of planning provision, in terms of and obviously we have historic data for what's been spent. So what we can take as an action is we could provide some information about historic spend in terms of learner support and learning support. But in terms of it being separated out as a separate budget, we don't operate the system in that way for the reason that I've explained.
Thank you very much. Are there any more questions on this item? Okay, I'm going to make just a couple of comments, and then if that's okay, we'll move to the vote. I just wanted to say that actually, I think the questions have been about making sure that this is spent locally and that voluntary groups are involved and ensuring that we're tracking all the time whether we are spending this are really, really helpful. I also wanted to say that I actually think that the fact that we're offering these providers potentially a 5-year term is in itself useful, because I think that one of the problems that we've had in the last couple of years has been an awful lot of changes and very quick need to spend money. The idea that money comes in and we're expected to spend it within 6 months and then we don't succeed. So I think that in order to build up provider capacity, that sense that we're giving them a sense that this is definitely something we're expecting to last for 5 years rather than just one, I think is really helpful. Clearly, the break clauses are crucial in that, because we need to be tracking whether what they're providing is a good quality. But I'm really pleased to see that we're trying to offer our providers a slightly longer term view to encourage them to build up capacity, because that's what we're so lacking. So thank you very much for the paper, Paminda. Congratulations on what I think has been substantially a very successful procurement process. So we are grateful for that in spite of all the questions. And we will now move to the vote. I will need a proposer and a seconder. Can I have any? So if Liz Every is happy to propose it and I'll second it, that would be great. All those in favour, if you could raise your hands now. I think that's unanimous. So thank you very much, Tamar, and thank you, committee and Paminda. We now move to, I think, my favourite item on the agenda, which is the cold spots report, I think, if I'm remembering right. And again, if I ask you to introduce it, Paminda, and then we'll come to the questions from the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. So, Paminda, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So at the July Skills Committee, members noted the project initiation document, the PID, for the further education cold spots in East Cambridgeshire and St Neots. In consultation and partnership with the respective district councils, the county council and our FE partners, the proposal is to create 2 new further education provisions. This is, of course, subject to feasibility and business cases. So this report now seeks Skills Committee recommendation for formal approval from the board to commence stage 1 of the project. And this will be through the creation of a new budget line in the medium-term financial plan, which will allocate £225,000 for the 2022-23 financial year from Gainshare. This funding has previously been agreed subject to approval by the board, and also to seek the necessary delegations to commission consultancy to undertake the feasibility and the writing of business cases. So milestones for delivery of stage 1 of the project are set out in table 3 to the report. Beneath the milestones, of course, there is a significant amount of work to be undertaken by the Combined Authority in conjunction with County. And as part of our commitment to work in co-production, 2 local advisory groups will be established for each area to provide the local insight and advice to steer the project. Engagement with Huntingdon District Council and East Cambridgeshire District Council to inform the local advisory group membership is underway, and both officers and lead members for skills from the districts have been highly supportive of the approach. So subject to board approval of the budget, the local advisory groups will meet in October and consultants will be appointed to complete the feasibility and business cases. County council support and input for the 16 to 18 and the 19 to 25 SEND aspects of the new provisions are key, and ensuring that we have suitable and sufficient places in education and training with a focus on technical education. For the adult education component, a high-level summary of the refreshed cold spots data for 2020-21 is included in page 43 to 45 of today's papers, looking at participation in adult education by parish. And this spotlights Huntingdonshire and East Cambridgeshire to inform this project. The feasibility of the projects and the outline business cases are scheduled for presentation at the March committees. Happy to take any further questions from committee.
Brilliant. Thank you, Paminda. We'll now come to the overview and scrutiny question.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, my question comes really from the purpose within the document at 1112. And the question is really, it comes from historical experience of there being further education provision in these areas before, which unfortunately haven't taken and they've closed down. And so the first question is, will the building of the 2 FE colleges, which are estimated between 25 and 40 million pounds, I always go by the highest number because things have a tendency to grow rather than shrink, actually deliver what is proposed? The concern is that this provision might be provided outside of our boundaries. So do we know that there'll be a negative impact on other providers who are on the edge of our area, but who serve our communities? And that's the second part of the question is really very much focusing on that, is what do we know about our learners who would qualify for further education, who receive it from outside of our own area, but nevertheless receive the education? It's a bit opaque about the evidence of cold spot related to what our learners actually are able to access. Thanks very much.
Paminda, sorry, I'll read out the formal response for next. So the response is that the first stage of the Addressing Further Education Cold Spots programme is to undertake a feasibility study. And this will take into consideration a number of factors to assess whether there is a need for new provision which is sustainable. The study will analyse scope and purpose, as well as consider the wider system impact. And then the second question on what do we know about our FE learners? The response is that we hold data on both FE enrolments who either study or live in the CPCA area, and further detailed information can be provided in a paper after the meeting if that would be helpful. Do you want to ask a more extensive answer?
No, that's brilliant. I've always wondered about how we can hold that data so we know precisely. So to know what learning is being provided to our learners outside in other areas would be really helpful. If you are going to produce that report, I'd be delighted to receive it. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that should be fine. In which case, I think probably both of those questions are now covered. So then we'll move on. Lovely. Okay. Comments from the rest of the committee, and I'm going to go to Liz first. Very smiley Liz.
Well, you would expect me to say something about this, wouldn't you? So I'm absolutely delighted that East Cambs has been identified. No, I'm not delighted it's been identified as a cold spot. That's the wrong way around. But that something is being done about that. And the data that you provided here, Paminda, is incredibly useful because it drills right down into my villages and I know exactly what's going on in each one. I think it's an interesting area because many times East Cambs doesn't get identified data. It's split across and we're not clear whether it's Cambridge or Fenland or whatever, or even Huntingdon. So that's really helpful. But this feasibility study will be a huge contribution to understanding how our learners, where our learners are, what they do. We already know providers are coming into the area, so I'm not sure we're going to build £40 million FE college, but a provision perhaps. But also being able to understand, I think more importantly than anything, is the barriers to the learning that can happen with our residents. And certainly its cost and actual transport, which causes some issues. And of course, it's not just our youngsters who are going, but it's the adult education, that's the delivery that's going to be there as well. So absolutely delighted and happy to help in any way that I can. You've got a quite tight schedule on this, Parminder, so it's like next April and it's back. So that's great. So really pleased to see movement on that. Thank you.
Wonderful. Yes, then.
I won't comment about the East Cam side because I'm with completely what Liz has already said about that. I know there's going to be a business case, but the only concern I have about the St Neots one is why it hasn't happened before. If there was a need, because there was Huntingdon Regional College and then subsequently Cambridge Regional College, I think, working in that area, and had there been a need for an outlier, as it were, an outlier position, one would have thought that they might have applied to do it before. So I accept entirely that there's been more building going on and a lot more housing going on in the area, and it may be that that's what is behind all of this, which probably the business case will bring forth for us. But I just thought I should raise it just as a question.
Chris, do you want to respond on that?
Yeah, can I just give you my absolute assurance that unless there is clear-cut, sustainable demand, and we know that the centres will be used at the right scale, this will not go ahead. And so therefore, there has to evidence that, and it's not just, I think, the numbers, it's how we engage and engage with those people who are most disaffected, who haven't been involved in the past. So, yeah, absolutely want to put provision on, but if it's not something that's going to be successful and it's not going to be used, then this will not go ahead. And so therefore, the terms of reference of the feasibility study are absolutely critical to get right to ensure that the feasibility study is accurate and reflects the questions that need to be answered before we look at investment.
Yeah, so Sam Wakeford from Huntingdon, forgot his surname there, whoops, has also just asked me to kind of relay how positive he's feeling about all this. I think looking at the specific data, which is really useful as has already been raised, it seems really well targeted. You can clearly see that St Neots is in need of a lot of additional engagement in adult education. The only thing I'd say, the figures are really, really useful, but I think the ones on page 44 and 45, something's a bit weird about them. I don't know, perhaps the overlay is a bit wrong, but yeah, just to raise perhaps those types of figures in the future might need a bit of work. But no, really positive about this, and same thing from Huntingdon.
Yeah, I mean, echoing Liz's comments, that I think it's welcome to take a look at it. As a South Cambs member, it's not so relevant for me, but it's interesting to see where these cold spots are. I think Fliss has more or less said what I was going to say, which is I'm really looking forward to the business case coming forward and then having a real discussion around that. So, as Parminder said, this is stage one of the process. I'm sure from the statistics that are in here that there is a real need, and therefore it then comes back to the business case to say what is required to address that need.
Thank you. I'm going to echo everyone else's positivity about this. I have to say I'm really delighted that that the work that we asked to start on this has gone forward so quickly, because it does feel as if this is something that actually we were asking questions about only a year ago, and to find ourselves to have made so much progress in that time is fantastic. So thank you very much to everybody who has picked this up and worked to get it to this stage. I know as from the County Council's capital programme that there has been a need to build a very large number of schools in across the county, and particularly that there's been a lot of growth in the St Neots area and in Ely recently. There's a lot more growth predicted for Soham and for that area, Kennet, etc. I mean, just astonishing levels of growth that are expected in some of those areas. The County Council is working very hard to make sure that we've got enough schools. It is the responsibility of the Combined Authority to make sure that we are ensuring that as those houses come forward, there is also post-16 education provision available. And given that both of those areas are places where at present the take-up is not as high as we would like it to be, I think there is a really good reason for looking at this, but we obviously need to have a really clear business case. The one other thing I would say is that I think we need to be open-minded about how it's delivered. I feel reasonably certain that there is a need for more provision. How that provision comes forward, there may be many different ways that might happen, and I think it is that the way the business case is drafted and the way we ask our consultants to look into that will be really important. But I think it may not be completely as sort of as straightforward as setting up a school. There might be lots of different ways of doing provision. So I will look forward to seeing that report when it comes back to us. And thank you very much for the work on it so far, Parminder, and good luck with the working with the consultants on it. I haven't heard anybody say anything that was other than positive. I think we've covered the Councillor Wakeford point, haven't we, that he was wanting to be made clear that he was very supportive of this. So if we move to a vote on this one, I'd like to propose this one, but can I ask for a seconder from the committee? Thank you, Sam, I think was first. So, and then all those in favour, if you could raise your hands now, that would be great. Liz, are you happy to support this? Sorry, we're moving to a vote. Can I just see again, all those in favour of this proposal? Thank you. Would have been surprised if you weren't supporting. Good, thank you very much. So I think that's that item covered, and we will move on to item 2.3, which is the Multiply programme. Is this, so I think, this is being introduced by Parminder also, so we'll go to Parminder and then we'll go to the overview and scrutiny question.
I just wondered whether we should go to Fliss first, just because it's been to the board.
Thank you, Parminder.
Okay,
I was also wondering about that, hence my hesitation. We'll go to Fliss
okay with you,
first.
Chair.
Okay, I will just talk about what's happened since the papers have been published, and then I will hand back over to Parminder to introduce the paper. So we were informed by the Department for Education I can't remember when. Perhaps I've been on leave for a couple of days, sorry, and everything flies. But we were notified that we should expect the grant funding agreement to arrive last week, and that if we were to receive payment for the Multiply programme in September, then it needed to be returned on Friday last week. There has been a delay and we haven't received the grant funding agreement. However, we do have the authority now to enter into that grant funding agreement, because we took it by urgency procedures to the Combined Authority Board, recognising that even though the paper had been published and this committee is sitting today, that we can only recommend to the Combined Authority to therefore enter into the grant funding agreement, and the Combined Authority Board is not meeting until the end of September, and so therefore that would give us too much of a delay. So this paper was originally for us to recommend to the Combined Authority Board to take forward the recommendations. The Combined Authority Board have already considered this paper and have agreed to all of the recommendations. This report is therefore for noting, because we already have that authority. But I would still like Parminder to enter into explaining the paper to you, so you're aware of the recommendations that have been approved.
Thank you very much, Fliss. And I think it's, I mean, while I was at the board meeting where this was approved, I think it's very important that this committee continues to have all the information that's available and feel a sense of ownership over this programme. So, Parminder, if you're happy to introduce it, that would be great.
Thank you, Fliss, and thank you, Chair. So as highlighted, the recommendations have already been approved. But obviously this is an opportunity for members to discuss the proposals in more detail. And we tried to provide quite a lot of detail in this paper to help inform members, given that the governance of performance and oversight of Multiply will be undertaken by the committee. So Skills Committee received the Multiply investment plan that was submitted to DfE at the July meeting. DfE have approved the investment plan and agreed the funding request of just under 4 million for the next 3 years. The key thing to note is that the programme runs on a financial yearly cycle at the moment, and therefore there is an element of expediency in mobilising the providers to maximise delivery of learning to our citizens. So this report sets out a high-level approach to programme delivery through the grant-funded providers and the independent training providers, and the allocation of contract awards and grant awards for year 1 are set out on page 52. As part of the procurement process of AEB, we also undertook a Multiply procurement process at the same time in order to be efficient and foreseeing the expediency issue in mobilising delivery. And those providers are set out on page 52 as well. A summary of the high-level outputs and the associated funding for the various on-menu interventions. So just to remind members that on-menu interventions are those which have been specified by DfE as part of the national programme. And also the off-menu interventions. There are 3 specific local off-menu interventions that will be delivered. Information about those are provided, and also the strategic partnerships that we will be working with to enable successful delivery of the programme. The other thing to note is that the DfE allows 10% of the funding to be used for programme management costs, including staffing, communications, audit, quality assurance, and evaluation. And then finally to add that Cambridgeshire Insights have undertaken a really helpful analysis, which we've included in your pack, of all the data and insights that are available on Numeracy. And this will help us to direct the delivery of provision, with a big focus on the north of the sub-region, where as the report notes, there's a greater need for numeracy interventions. Are there any questions from members?
Liz.
Thank you, Parminder. Well, if you thought we had trouble getting people into low-level courses for English and ESOL, then numeracy is going to be our next challenge, obviously, because we all understand how adults who have found it really difficult if they haven't accessed numeracy qualifications. And the key here, if I may just say, is about how this is delivered, because this is going to be incredibly important, because if they haven't got their qualification by GCSE level or the functional skills, which are really hard, then a different style of learning has to be in place for these people. Plus the identification from the individual of the need to have improvement in their own numeracy skills. I think this is going to be really important, because we know that people have phobia about numeracy, which extends visiting school and extends beyond. So I'm really pleased to see the different styles that you've got there. Could I just ask you at some time to not only mention prisoners and those who've left the care service, but also those who are in the armed forces, so they particularly may have a need there. And also just wanted to say regarding champions, I know this is operational, but what do we mean by maths champions? Is that somebody who's really, really good at maths, or somebody who's overcome the need to be good at maths? And also, I was just wondering, are we engaging with our business organisations, not just Growth Works for Skills, because they tend to be going to individual businesses rather than the organisations? And certainly when we look at the programme for LSIP, I think that's going to be really important.
Thank you, Paminda.
Just to say that I agree with all of those comments that have been made. And in terms of, I think, again, I'd have to go into quite a lot of detail in order to address the individual points. So what I would say is that as we mobilise the delivery partners, we will have delivery plans from them. And then from that information, we will be able to provide a high-level summary of which will include some of the points that you've made, Councillor Every. But I don't think that I can go into that much detail at the committee today. But I'd be happy to provide further high-level summary of the interventions and what's being delivered, where it's being delivered, and the high-level numbers as we gather the delivery plans from the providers. If that's okay, Chair.
Absolutely, yes, yeah, absolutely.
We fully recognise those points, though, and so some of the things we are considering is family learning, so therefore going into schools, and then also recognising that we need to go into the workplace. So this is very much taking learning to the learners rather than expecting them to come. So there'll be a mix and balance, as you would expect, but it is very much recognising that we need to deliver this in a very different way, because it's the engagement of, as you say, if people don't pass maths and English first time round, it's very difficult to therefore pass it subsequently. So yeah, it's very much recognising that this provision needs to be targeted in a very different way.
Thank you. Sam.
Thank you. I've got a few things to say on this one, so you may have to kind of stop me halfway through and get some answers, and then I'll come back. So sorry about that in advance. But the first thing is just that on page 51 with the strategic partnership to support delivery, I think this was raised at the Combined Authority Board, actually. I was surprised that the Cambridge and Peterborough Region of Learning wasn't mentioned in there because of all the work that they're doing. I'm not sure if that's something that members have previously been aware of before I joined the committee. But the Region of Learning is doing all sorts of work to dynamically link employers to new talent. They've got a brilliant initiative called digital badging, which kind of provides a very quickly and easily verifiable method for employers to look at the skills that people have gained and how they've done it. They've got technology wherein they can analyse openings for jobs and other opportunities, and then kind of show to potential applicants what skills they'll need and actually what courses are available to them to fill that need. And that, I think, ties into a lot of what we raised before about not being able to fill a lot of the courses that we're offering at the moment. So it would be really good if we can get some kind of assurance as to whether they will be included going forward in this, because I think it would be really, really useful. And then a couple of other points. On page 51, so I'll just find that from my notes. I was looking at the management fee of 399,000 from the funding that we've got, not a fee, but you know what I mean, the amount of the total allocation that we're going to use on management. Do we actually need to use that much? Because I know that I'm not sure if that's actually the maximum amount that we can use. Is it necessary? It'd be useful to kind of see a breakdown of that in some more detail. Shall I keep going or shall I stop there, Chair? Keep going?
Keep going, yep.
Then on page 52, I was just wondering if we could get a bit more detail about the statement about it saying that half of the potential delivery time has lapsed. I'm not sure if that's because it's working on a different sort of academic year, but given it's September, I just would like to have that clarified if possible, what exactly that means. And also kind of if half the potential delivery time has lapsed, why didn't we do this earlier to prevent that from happening? Then the data sort of in the appendix of the report was really, really useful, I think. I was particularly worried about some of the Progress 8 scores, because the Progress 8 scores of schools, sorry, I'm trying to word this. A lot of the data showing that there's particularly low attainment in certain schools, you can't explain that away with a Progress 8 score as being due to learner profiles, as in because Progress 8 score compares quite similar schools. So I'm just wondering if we can get a bit more detail on what we're doing to address that problem, especially in Peterborough where it's a negative score. And just, I think it's important to recognise that we really need to be doing lots of work on adult education as we are. But if the problem is starting in the schools, if people aren't developing the skills that they need there, we can't just address that by dealing with it later in life. We need to look at what the problems are within the actual school system and look at what we can do there. And it'd be good to kind of get a bit more on that in future meetings. Just to return very briefly to the region of learning point, would it be possible to perhaps get a quick briefing for members in one of those informal committee sessions that we have now? I think the director will be really pleased to come in and just talk to us for 15, 20 minutes about the work they're doing. But yeah, sorry about all that. I'm done.
Thank you. Parminder, if you want to start, and then if there's anything else that Fliss wants to pick up, I'll come back to Fliss in a minute.
Yeah, thank you for those points, Councillor. Just to say, in terms of strategic partnerships, as you mentioned, it was raised at the board, so we'll be looking at that. In terms of the breakdown of the costings, I think you're right in terms of highlighting in terms of that's the maximum that we have access to. It doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to spend all of that. And there is some, now that we have approval of the funding. When the paper was written, because we didn't have approval, it was sort of estimating what the likely costs would be. So now that we know we've got the funding, and it links to the next point about the financial year and the delivery time, it's unlikely that we will use the full amount in year one, given that because it's running on a financial year. So that's the 1st of April 2022 to the 31st of March 2023. So because of the way that's panned out, and that's because of the way that the DFE have administered it. So there's nothing that we could have done really, other than to take just to incur expenditure at risk without going through the necessary governance processes as we're doing today, and that wasn't something that we were prepared to do. So I think you're right in terms of that point about do we need to spend it, and so what we will do is to provide a breakdown of what our intention is and what that looks like across the three years of spend. And I've just amalgamated the figure. I haven't split it out in the paper. So we now that we have approval, we can move forward. We will be doing that piece of work, and we're happy to share that with members. And I think I've covered the point about the delivery delays is to do with the DFE timelines, not anything that the combined authority has done. And then the progress 8 scores point, I think it's about the remit of the skills committee and the combined authority, and whether this actually sits more in terms of the responsibilities of the county council. That's not to say that because we're trying to create a joined up system, that's something that we don't contribute to. And I'm sure Fliss might want to add something to this around the item that she's got later on the employment and skills strategy delivery plan, because there is a proposal in there around an education committee, and certainly this could be something that could sit very, very well there. The intention of the data analysis really was just to provide a baseline using every possible data source that we have that looks at maths and numeracy, and also to take that whole system approach in terms of the education system. But you're absolutely right to ask the question in terms of what more can we do in terms of working with adults and working with families and working with the parents in terms of supporting education more holistically. So I guess what you're asking for is a better triangulation of the system, and I hope that that item and also what I've said provides some assurance that that's what we're working towards as part of the skills strategy.
Thank you. Fliss, do you want to add anything to that? No. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Any more? Lynn? Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, my question revolves around, again, it's page 52 is where I'm interested. What my question asks is I was concerned, having looked at the paperwork, that the allocation of funds may not fit the regions precisely. And I understand we've already talked about the AEB funding, and then you put the multiply funding out to the same organisations, which does explain why Evolve and Ixion and Skills Network have applied. The one that confuses me, and perhaps you can be a bit clarity, the MPCT, which I believe is the military academies. So they're set up to provide further education to allow people to then join the military, and they're publicly funded. I'm just wondering if they're not just getting 2 bites at the cherry, but they're getting a whole fresh cherry, and whether that's appropriate use of £200,000 when, if you look at Table D, perhaps we could invest more in our current providers. Obviously, I'm biased in terms of Peterborough. I'd like to see more there, and I appreciate that these new providers might actually be providing in Peterborough anyway. But my concern is particularly around that one. They've got locations from Aldershot to Wrexham and all the obvious military recruitment centres, but I couldn't see anything on the website that was local, and so that was my concern. That was an anomaly amongst all the other ones. And then we've explained already the other 3 that are currently not providing within our area. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to read out the official response, but then I will actually go straight to Perminder after that for a bit more detail, because this is quite short. The only element of the multiply provision defined by area in the paper is our grant fund providers. The majority of these providers have a base in either Peterborough or Fenland. It is anticipated that learning will not just be on campus, but in the community. You will also note that a large proportion of the funding is through ITPs and strategic partners. Both will deliver where there is most need. So that's the official response. But I'll now go straight to Perminder for a more unofficial and probably more detailed one. Thank you, Perminder.
And just to say, Councillor Coles, as part of the procurement process, the contract negotiation process, that some of the points that you've raised were discussed and addressed by the providers, and we do take your point about the MPCT organisation, which is focused on military preparation. However, they have been acquired by Learning Cove Group, who do have a footprint in our area as a subcontractor of 2 of our colleges, and they have been successful in the AEB procurement as well. So when you look at them as a group, our expectation is that they will have the necessary expertise in terms of delivery. And just picking up the point that Fliss made earlier about the way in which we manage grant-funded providers vis-a-vis independent training providers, that they are paid on actual performance. So yes, they have a contract value. It doesn't necessarily mean that's what they earn in terms of delivery. So just to provide a bit of reassurance around how that process means, and because it was a procurement process, it was important that we don't compromise the procurement process in terms of if you like some of the subjective issues around providers, and to focus on administering a robust process based on the application responses. The next stage will be around due diligence processes with these providers, and secondly, and which is why there is a point in the paper about adjusting the contract awards based on what their delivery will look like now that we've been through our governance process, and then secondly, also in terms of what the DfE have accepted in terms of our delivery model as well. So these are the maximum contract awards for year 1, if you like. But in terms of what they will actually get and what they will actually deliver, will be subject to their delivery plans, and those being agreed by us. I think that was the main gist of the question. But just to provide the reassurance that contract management and the due diligence process will now kick in, and pick up some of the points that you've raised.
Yes, absolutely.
There's just a little bit there, Parminder, about my concern that there wasn't further uplift to the current providers, and whether you make it clear now that if there is any underspend anywhere, there's going to be money available, and whether that can be made available to our existing providers, who I'm sure would benefit from an uplift?
In terms of performance management, that we will be moving the funding based on performance, because obviously if you think about year one, we've got a very tight timeline in terms of delivery. So these allocations are, I feel like, a year one allocation, but for year two and year three, it will be based on performance. So absolutely, we will be reallocating and redistributing the funds based on need. And this is just an initial allocation and contract award to get the ball rolling swiftly.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, and thank you, Parminder. Lynn, did you want to come in now?
Yes, thank you. Yes, I was very interested in that last response, Parminder. Thank you for that. And that it's based upon, they don't actually necessarily get all of this money unless they actually perform, is really what you're saying. Because one of my main concerns was to look at the fact that our grant-funded colleges, the Cambridgeshire Regional, etc., all the way down that list, we're actually receiving less than the ITPs. And I just thought, well, these are the people that we know, and we know how they do it, and we know how we get on with them, and we know their ability. Whereas some of these people, the ITPs, we do know, like Steadfast and people like that, but certainly not the others. And I just wanted to make sure that there was going to be money, extra money for our colleges to provide more should the need arise, and because of course we know they're going to do it, how they're going to do it, because we've used them for years and not these others. So that was a major one. If somebody can just respond and assure me that that's going to be okay. But I also noticed when I looked through, as Councillor Carling looked through all of this business intelligence, and some of which I have to tell you went over my head, but I actually did think that it seemed to be showing that obviously the region that I represent, which is Peterborough, has got the lowest numeracy of anywhere. And I think at the moment that probably includes Fenland. And so why wasn't more going to where it is actually needed is my point. And I think it's an important point, because that's exactly what the business intelligence shows.
Parminder, do you want to pick that up, or?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, we can provide the assurance that that will be the case, and that's why we commissioned the data analysis, and why we're using that as a basis to direct the providers. So yes, I can provide that assurance. In terms of the way that we've allocated the funding for the grant providers was based on their past delivery on numeracy, which gives us an indication of their capacity. So that's how that's been done. And as it says in the paper, it's an initial award. It doesn't necessarily mean that this is what they're going to end up delivering. Funding will be moved around based on actual delivery. And then in terms of the independent training providers and targeting the north, again, now that we've been through the governance process, we'll be able to have those deeper conversations around actual delivery locations. And again, we can provide further information once we've looked at those delivery plans. Don't want to get into too much operational detail at Skills Committee, but certainly that could be provided as a written update, just so that you have an understanding of where they're delivering and what they're delivering, and just to assure you that certainly in terms of rural communities, that was one of the themes that was discussed, and how especially some of the independent training providers, how they're going to target those, and also some of the disadvantaged groups that we've spoken about before, how and what they're going to do to target those. And certainly it was part of the assessment criteria for the procurement.
Thank you. Lots of good questions again. I just want to put on record my thanks to Parminder and Fliss for an astonishing amount of work that's gone into this in the last 6 months. And I think it's just worth reminding ourselves about the timescales and the work that they've done in that time, because my recollection was that, and I may be wrong about the dates, but I think that the availability of this money to be bid for was only found out about late last winter. That meant that a bid had to go in the spring. We got the information, we heard that we had been successful in that bid in late spring and early summer, so we only knew that this money was coming sort of late spring, early summer. That's a phenomenal amount of work already that needed to be done to get to that point. So from then to get to the need for an investment plan, which came to the Skills Committee on the 4th of July, that then needed to be signed off by government in August, and now we're kind of getting to the point where we're getting out to providers. The scale and the pace at which we are being expected to respond to government saying money might be available, respond to government saying money is available, and then to spend it is kind of crazily fast. And so the fact that we've kind of done half a year before we're getting, so of a 3-year program, half of the first year is gone before any of the money is coming in. It comes back to the point that I was making in the previous thing about a 5-year program. Actually, if we want to genuinely increase our capacity to do this work, we need to have a more consistent approach, and we need to know that when these things are coming up in a bit further in advance. But on this occasion, thank you so much for a phenomenal amount of work that's been done over the summer on this. It is phenomenal, and I think it's important that we all recognise just how hard everybody's worked to get this to the point at which it has. So thank you very much for it. Now we have to hope that we get the next steps done quickly and that we can start getting these providers out talking to people, because the most important thing here is that we actually persuade people to come and do these courses. And as I think Liz was saying at the very beginning, that's not easy. Thank you, Paminda, for an enormous amount of work that's gone into this. Fingers crossed for the next steps. This is just for noting, but it's important to have had that conversation. And I think it's important also to note our thanks to the team for everything that's been done on this so far. We don't need to vote, so we will now move on. I think that's the end of part 2 of the agenda. So thank you very much, Paminda, for all of those items which were yours under part 2. Moving on to part 3. The next one is also, Paminda, back to you for an introduction on the Department for Education Funding and Accountability System. So over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So members will be aware we've had discussions at previous committees about the Skills and Post-16 Education Act 2022, which received royal assent. And now the DfE is tasked with implementing the reforms that were set out in the Skills for Jobs White Paper 2021, and funding and accountability across the whole of the system, including devolved and non-devolved areas, is one of the main areas of focus for the DfE. So this paper sets out the second consultation that they're undertaking across the sector around funding and accountability of the FE system. The consultation is open at the moment, and it closes on the 21st of September. And we, the Combined Authority, will be submitting our response, focusing on the areas of note for the devolved funded system. So and so in terms of the previous consultation that was undertaken, the Local Government Association and the Combined Authority did submit a response to it, and we intend to do the same with this one. So the paper provides a summary of the key reforms. So the first one, I'm not going to go through each one, but just to give a very quick highlight of it. So the first one is around simplifying the funding system. And for us, that is about amalgamation of the adult education budget and the free courses for jobs, the level 3 lifetime skills guarantee pot of money that we get, amalgamating those into one single pot, which will be called the Skills Fund. So, and then simplifying some of the funding processes and rules around that. So that's something that we welcome and we support. The more that we can simplify and reduce and streamline processes will be helpful to combined authority, but also to our providers. The second one of note here is around multi-year funding allocations, and to give, at the moment, our funding comes on an annual basis. We receive our grant letter in January for the subsequent academic year, and the DfE is looking to move to a multi-year allocation process, and again that will be very helpful to us as well. The second one is around a fairer funding system, and here they're talking about the basis on which funding is allocated and moving towards a needs-based funding system. So if you think about how funding is allocated to us at the moment, it was based on historic funding levels, and the historic funding levels were based on what the providers prior to devolution had actually delivered rather than local need. And so the new needs-based formula for distributing the skills fund, what they talk about is that they want it to be supporting levelling up. In the previous consultation, they talked about looking at demographic growth, and from the 2021 census, we've experienced that in our sub-region, looking at deprivation and also looking at rurality. So what we expect is that potentially we could benefit from that needs-based allocation system rather than a system that's based on recurrent funding. And then the third area is around a system focused on outcomes for learners, employers, and value for money for the taxpayer. And that is about reforming the funding rates. So at the moment, adult education and the level 3 funding is based on national funding rates and applying different weightings to those curriculum areas where there is greatest demand and need from a labour market perspective. So again, that would again something that we would support. And then around accountability, there are new duties for college governors around meeting local skills needs. There's a new performance dashboard, and there's also enhanced Ofsted inspection around the new skills measure, and ensuring that providers are delivering on national and local skills priorities, particularly where there is an LSIP in place for a local area. So in paragraph 2.4, what I've concluded is that the reforms do not seek to roll back any of our devolved functions. And in some respects, you can argue that actually there is a strengthening of our role, particularly around the local skills improvement plan and the duty on the chamber or ERBs to engage with the MCAs and to take the views into account, and providing a statement for us to confirm that the views have been taken into account. There's also around college governance reviews in terms of meeting skills needs, and again, college governing bodies being cognizant of the MCA's employment and skills strategy, and that wasn't in place before. That will be in place. And then also formal arrangements around the single improvement plan, where colleges are struggling and the FE commissioner is intervening. Previously, that wasn't formalised in the way that it is now. And then some of the other proposals I've set out in the paper that we're working through, such as the new performance dashboard, and also a timeline for each of the proposals. So without going into too much detail in terms of the consultation, are there any questions or anything that members wish to note? And also to say that we're happy to provide an opportunity for members to input into the combined authorities response, which will be submitted on the 21st.
Thank you. I'll go to Peter and then Liz.
Just very quick, Pominter. I noticed references made, and presume this is going to be quite important, on the needs-based analysis. So, and you also made comment, Pominter, about the, our rural nature and some of the deprivation in some of our areas. So, presumably that's part of our submission. I just wanted to check. Thanks.
Do you want to just reply very quickly on that, Paminda, before I go to Liz?
Yes, absolutely. I think in terms of, there's certainly the previous consultation that we submitted a very strong lobby, if you like, in terms of moving towards the needs-based formula, because previously deprivation and rurality were not taken into account. And so what we expect is that we could potentially benefit from this funding allocation. And certainly in this proposal, we will be lobbying again for that to be taken forward. We're also, just to say as well, we're also lobbying for some modelling in terms of how the funding would be distributed through some of the data groups that we have with the DFE, for them to actually model it for us. Because in terms of making an assessment of whether from a funding perspective it's beneficial for us, we need to see that modelling across the country in terms of the overall settlement that we would receive.
Thank you. Liz?
Sorry, just a quick one. The LSIP is mentioned all the way through these documents, and particularly 3.3 as well. I would like to know more information about how that's going to work, please, because obviously we're working with the business organisations who've been appointed along with this, and I can't see how it works. I'm sure others may, but I think that could be something we could put on our informal training sessions, just actually how that's going to work, because obviously it's a different style of what we've done before.
Do you want to pick that one up first? Or?
Yeah, and I will refer to the LSIT when we go on to the Employment and Skills Implementation Plan, but I agree, further information needs to come forward. Whilst I've got the floor, if that's okay. So I think it's also useful to note that whilst they call it a single pot of funding, DFE really aren't going far enough. So therefore, skills boot camps are not in the single pot of funding. Traineeships are not in this pot of funding. And so whilst they say it's a single pot of funding, there's only 2 pots of funding that they're currently merging. So they've added more complexity to the system and aren't actually taking that complexity out. So that will be another part of our response, that whilst they say single pot, it's far from it.
Thank you. Sam?
Very briefly, just over the course of the report, there's quite a few mentions of Ofsted. And I was just wondering, because I'm not too far out of the education system myself, and I know that there are lots of failings of Ofsted in many cases to properly capture an image of a provider. Providers can, in some ways, game the system, and I think often Ofsted can sometimes fail to recognise uniqueness in methods of teaching, instead kind of really prescribing people right down to the last detail. So I'm just kind of wondering if, as well as that sort of inspection, we've got any other methods and perhaps more holistic ways of looking at how well providers are doing in meeting skills need.
Thank you. I'm happy if anyone wants to respond. I'm also slightly aware that question is probably somewhat off topic for the consultation response, but Paminda, if you've got anything you want to add.
I think I can answer the second part in terms of what other data sources are available in terms of looking at provider performance, and the dashboard that the DFE are going to produce is one of those things. In addition to that, there is a diagnostic process that the FE Commissioner also undertakes, and part of the proposals is that they will do a lot more preventative diagnostic work with colleges, and also colleges can request the diagnostic work to be undertaken, even and they don't have to be under intervention to receive that support. And there's also discussion about local authority providers of adult education also being able to access that support from the FE Commissioner as well. So I can answer the second part of the question, but not the first.
Thank you. Excellent. I don't see any further hands. Just a couple of comments. I absolutely agree with what Fliss has said about that they may be simplifying things in one area, but it's not going anything like far enough. And I would like to encourage the combined authority to not feel constrained in its response to the consultation. I think you said that you would focus on the devolve funding stuff. I mean, actually, if this is, there are things that are outside the devolved funding areas which have quite a big impact on what we can and can't do. So I think it would be perfectly legitimate for us to comment on things that are beyond that stage. I've got a slight question. We've got this for noting. But I think that the intention is that there will be a response coming from the combined authority. So I wonder whether we ought to have a recommendation to say that we're delegating a formal response to the officers in consultation with the members of the committee, which I think is implied in the paper, but I don't think it appears in the response. I think it says under purpose 2 that members will be invited to provide input. And then a response will be put forward. And I just wonder whether it would be useful to have that in our recommendations. So I don't know what your view is on that, Tamar. So my suggested wording is that we delegate the sign-off of a formal response to the interim director of skills in consultation with the chair and committee members, which I think is what is intended anyway. I just think it might be worth having it made explicit. Do you want me to say that again more slowly? Yes, please. Sorry. To delegate the sign-off of a formal response to the interim director of skills in consultation with chair and committee members. Is that okay? Okay, thank you.
Do you mind if I just say, I was asked to say that Peterborough City Council will be putting in its own response when it comes to adult education. I just wanted to make that clear to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. That's great. Okay. I think we probably now do need to take a vote on it because we are delegating some responsibility. So I don't know if anyone, I'm happy to propose it and I'll take Peter as a seconder. That's great. Thank you. All those in favour? That's great. That's unanimous, I think. Brilliant. Thank you very much. We now move on to item 3.2, which is the Boot Camps Contract Award, which is being introduced by Melissa, I think. Did Melissa appear? No, she's not there.
She's
so
poorly.
It will be, sorry, it will be Fliss.
So it will be me. Apologies, bear with me. Melissa is unfortunately not well today and so is not with us. So this, hopefully you will recall that at the Combined Authority Board on the 30th of March, delegation was recommended to accept the grant funding in accordance with the grant funding agreement to create a new budget line and also delegate authority to the Chief Executive to enter into, sign and award grant funding agreements to training providers. Following a procurement exercise, I'm pleased to report that we have awarded contracts to 7 providers for the skills boot camps. You'll recall that this is grant funding, so therefore different to the Wave 2 contract, of which it was a competitive bid. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to award contracts in all of the lots, and that's because we just haven't received the submissions from providers. And you'll recall from conversations earlier on in this committee meeting that we have been working with Parminder and his team to have discussions with some of those unsuccessful providers for the AEB provision, purely because they were oversubscribed. We are looking, therefore, to carry on with our awarding of contracts, and we're currently having conversations with a number of providers to enter into direct awards. This is just to notify you of those providers who have been successful. and just to assure you that significant work is being taken forward to ensure that we're able to allocate the rest of the provision. And then just to remind you as well that the longest these courses is 16 weeks, and so therefore we can continue to start new learners until into the new year, and so there is still time to allocate this provision successfully. This paper is just to note, as we already have those authorities.
Liz.
I appreciate it's just for noting, but if I could just refer you to 2.3 on page 86, quite a powerful statement there, which says, with a guaranteed job interview in the case of a new job, and I'm just wondered whether we have any outcome statistics or will have outcome statistics. Obviously, some people will be in jobs, so that won't apply, but that's a very powerful statement in terms of impact.
And that is part of the funding, and so therefore providers do not receive all of their funding unless they're able to demonstrate that outcome, which is why so many providers are not wanting to enter into this type of provision, because you have to have really good working providers relationships with a number of employers, and it's hard going. So therefore a number of our existing AEB providers simply are not wanting to enter into this space at the moment. It's a tough ask.
So if it's a tough ask, then it doesn't do what it wants to do, does it? Because if the people aren't prepared to take that, and I absolutely understand why, that's one element which is unfortunate, because it sort of closes the circle that people have moved on. Can you see it having a major impact in future if this clause remains there?
I think with the direction of travel, which is always good to bring providers and employers closer together, then I think over time, then providers might be more prepared to take the leap as well. But this funding still is on a 12-month cycle. And so therefore, it's a lot to ask people to develop, commission new courses, employ new people, develop new relationships, if there's no guarantee of funding for the following year. And again, it's something we're lobbying DFE to ask for longer term funding, because this short term funding doesn't help anybody.
I'm assuming we keep on saying this, don't we, Chair, that it's not good enough? I'll just leave that with you.
Seems to come up in every meeting I'm at the moment. But yes, I think we are keeping on saying it, and we will keep on saying it. I think it is important to flag that that there is a challenge in spending this money, and it's important for us to be kind of cognizant of that at this point, and that if we don't manage to spend it, it will be due to some of the constraints about the way in which it was handed over, rather than due to any lack of effort on the part of the Combined Authority, who have done a great job in getting to this point. Lynn.
Yes, could I, just going back to Liz's point about the outcome statistics, if we could, I really look forward to seeing those and seeing how much, because I can see that there's actually one grouping in Peterborough that has applied here as well. But I should be very interested to see geographically how many people apply and where. You know, that's because the geographic side of this is quite important with our rurality as well as our deprivation, isn't it, in the north?
Very much so. And if we think of Fenland, where there are less employers rather than self-employed people, then getting those outcomes will be even more challenging.
Sorry, Andy, you should have brought you in ages ago. Andy.
It's fine, Chair. I'm happy to contribute whenever. My question again around the Skills Bootcamp was the digital Skills Bootcamp was a bit of a challenge, and there's what £1.7 million underspent, and that's always a worry that we're still facing these challenges as has just been articulated. So I suppose I'm looking for some reassurance that with a large amount of money and some different providers that this could be delivered. But I sense that you are somewhat nervous about it being delivered over the year. And I just wondered if you'd like to comment on that.
As my team will tell you, I am forever the optimist and forever the person who seeks perfection. And so therefore, my team will do absolutely everything we can do to ensure that it's a success. However, acknowledge that there are significant challenges to making this programme a success. And one of our biggest asks, and it's the same ask across the whole of the country, is to extend the term of this funding to therefore make it more achievable. I did note that West Midlands Combined Authority have only just launched a procurement exercise for £5 million for the delivery of boot camps. So whilst they'll have a bigger pot than we do, it's just to let you know that it's not a challenge that we're facing alone. Other combined authorities are still putting out new procurement exercises now.
Thank you. It was just what happened to the 1.688 million? We're still being able to use that for a period of time. It's been extended. Have I read that correctly? Or has that had to go back? So potentially, could we just lose all this money if we can't get it all spent in the next financial year?
Yeah, so if we're going back to Wave 2 funding, outcomes can still be delivered until the end of this calendar year. So therefore, we're still working with our Wave 2 providers. We can't take new recruits on, but we can continue to get those outcomes. And because of the way that the funding is allocated at different milestones, we've still got a significant amount of money to award, assuming that we get positive outcomes. In terms of Wave 3 funding, currently we're looking at this financial year for delivery of outcomes. But again, that will be people on programme, and there'll still be subsequent 6 months for them to achieve their outcomes, if that makes any sense.
So we just have to get sufficient sign-ups, not necessarily delivery
Yes.
over that financial year.
Yeah.
Lovely, thank you.
Sorry, Fliss, my formal answer to that question, which I'm now not going to bother to read because yours was much better, says that the outcomes are expected until December 2023, which actually gives us...
That's 2022.
Okay, so that's an error on the thing rather than your error. That's very good, thank you. But yes, I think we do need to keep making the case to government that actually to try and spend that money within the timescale that they are expecting is going to be a pretty tough challenge. But if they actually want us to do the work, they could give us a bit longer to do it, and we probably will. So actually I had another question which is related to that, which is that we've got a particular set of things that we're hoping that providers have said they'll deliver 100 of these and 30 of those. If we find that some are being delivered more quickly and some are not delivering, is it possible to move the money around within those categories so that we can get as much done as possible? Brilliant, thank you, that's helpful. Sam?
Yeah, so I was just wondering if, again, we can involve the region of learning in this because of the work that they're doing in terms of sort of showing people what skills they'll need to go for certain opportunities and where those skills can be gained in terms of these boot camps if we're struggling to fill them at all.
So region of learning, I mean, they work with GrowthWorks with skills already. And so in terms of publicising these on their platform, yes, but I don't think that they would be suitable to be a provider.
No, not as a provider, I meant.
Yeah.
Thank you. I don't see any further questions, and I think this is also for noting. Is that correct? So we can move on to the next one, but thank you very much for that item. The next one is the Employment and Skills Strategy Implementation, which is a huge paper. So thank you, Fliss, for this.
So you'll recall that we spent quite some time working on the employment and skills strategy and have continued to look at how best to take forward the implementation of the plan. You'll see quite a lengthy document attached to the paper, of which it talks you through some of the areas of the strategy, looking at how we could take forward the governance. And we did discuss at our informal skills committee briefing that new governance structure. One of the key points that I would like to make is that you'll be aware that the Combined Authority, we're currently undertaking a full governance review. And so any of these recommendations will be considered in accordance with that governance review. So we will make sure that the timing that review is taking place, that these considerations will also be included there. You'll note that there is an education committee in the governance of the implementation plan. This is something that was in the devolution deal and hasn't yet been enacted, and so therefore this is something that we will be taking forward. And as Councillor Carlin mentioned earlier, this is where I do think it would be helpful to have the triangulation of work with the schools within the combined authority as well. You'll be aware that one of the things that I've been committed to in leading the skills provision here is looking at the long-term outcomes and system change. And so therefore there are a number of actions here that are how we take forward some of these system-wide long-term change projects. On page, if I get the right page, but I'm not because I'm looking at a different document to you, but there is a number of defined actions to take us through to the next year to how we can take forward some of these key things. There's a number of business as usual activities that we currently undertake at the Combined Authority, which will take us on our journey to meeting a number of the required KPIs. The thing that will take additional time is working with partners in a very different way in how we can create that system change, such as working alongside the LSIP. So you will probably be aware that it was announced last week that the Cambridgeshire Chamber of Commerce are now the ERB, employer representative body for the combined for the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough region. And I am working very closely with Vic, who is the CEO, about how we can work together to take forward and make sure that the LSIP is a success. And just to show the level of commitment that we have here at the Combined Authority, I have suggested seconding a member of staff on a part-time basis to the Chamber. And I've also offered up some of my time to per month to therefore make sure that we are totally entwined going forward as the main commissioner of adult skills provision in the area. I'm not going to go into any significant detail in the implementation plan. I'm happy to take questions unless there's anything in particular you would like me to go into detail on.
I'll remember to go to Andy first this time and then come back to Liz.
Thank you very much, Chair. I hope you've spoken to Peterborough Chamber of Commerce as well, by the way, for this, but that would be really helpful. Yes, my question, it relates really to retirees returning and to the 50-plus cohort. Having gone through all the paperwork, it wasn't specific, and I was particularly looking at page 106, or I think it's page 12 in the original document, which is the organogram. It talks about the resident reference group, and I'm just wondering whether that returning retirees and the 50-plus cohort should really be there, because that's such an important target group. And I can't see where they have access or the ability to be referenced within the structure. But that was really a point rather than a question.
Yes, thank you, and noted. And that is, yeah, we need to reflect that, because one of my comments when drafting this was that a lot of our provision is adult. And so therefore, whilst useful to get the youth voice, we need to have a way of making sure that we are representative of every possible learner rather than just our young people. And there is a formal answer. I don't know if you want to read the formal, I wrote it. So, but there isn't any additional money in the system at the moment. So there's lots of money that we're currently using, and it's how best we work together. So for instance, DWP now have a 50-plus coordinator based within the region. So they're a new post. I'm meeting with them, I think, this week. So it's how do we get all the different people who have a responsibility for certain characteristics and cohorts of our residents in joining those people together to ensure that we make sure that the provision is efficient and most effective.
I'm going to read a couple of bits. Well, no, I'll just read the formal answer. Most of the formal answer you've just had, but there's one extra bit at the end. There is significant support across the system to support 50-plus cohort. For instance, DWP have recently created a new role in all regions to focus on the 50-plus cohort. The CPCA will, as with a number of other areas, partner with key organisations to assure a system-wide approach to coordinate provision. At this stage, there is no additional funding to support this work at the CPCA, and therefore it will require a more joined-up approach to ensure greater impact. And I think it was worth reading it for that last sentence, which we probably need to pick up. Okay, I think Liz was next, then Lynn, then Peter.
I just wanted to ask a general question about changing circumstances as this evolves. It's excellent work, as always. And I'm just thinking about whether there's going to be any modelling by Metronomics because of the proposed congestion charges in Cambridge and what impact that might have. Obviously looking at it from East Cam's perspective, but it will, I'm sure that others will as well, not only just for employment, but also access to skills, so on.
So any points like that, gratefully received. So there will be some additional work that we commission as a result to therefore inform how we take this forward. So anything like that, really welcome from all councillors to make sure that we are focusing the attention in the right places. We're also looking, as part of this work, which isn't on here, is to have a joint transport and skills group with representation from across the whole of the combined authority as well, recognising that one of the biggest barriers to entering skills provision is connectivity.
Thank you. I noticed, the first thing I sort of noticed when I looked at this is it actually says it's the final draft, and there's going to be no more changes to it, I'm assuming. That this is it, that we're expected to approve this as it. Is that correct?
To receive comments here today, to therefore, it's, unless, because we could just carry on, it will be a live document, and so therefore, but comments received today will be implemented into the published draft.
Good. It just worried me a bit, that was all, because there were just one or two things which I didn't quite understand. You've mentioned the major one, which is the mention of the Education Committee, because the Education Committee appeared in the strategy, the actual skills strategy that went forward. And when I started to ask about, well, who's on it, because I'm not, and which of our officers in Peterborough is on it, because I don't know of any, including Jonathan Lewis. And so at the time, and that's about as far as it went, but it appears here again, and it talks about place leaders. I thought,
Yeah. So
anyway, but I do know from him now that there are no terms of reference, that he has raised it, that it is undergoing operation, as it were. But I mean, who is going to be on it is one of my first questions, please. Because it is in the combined authority requirement, isn't it? It's actually in their constitution, or whatever you call it.
So I raised it with Jonathan Lewis when I met with him, saying that it's in the Devo, it's in the devolution deal, but it isn't currently in existence. So I went to Jonathan first off, and so together we're going to work on a draft set of terms of reference, but it will come back here, and it will also have to be approved by the CA board. So these are just proposals at the stage, and so as I said, with the governance review, we'll be working with colleagues in governance services to make sure that it is established in the way that it needs to.
As Councillor Carling was saying, it's hugely important that the schools are engaged, and not just in the sort of skills committee work and the adult skills, etc. But I mean, I'm wanted thoroughly engaged in the new university and the present universities as well, because that's hugely important. Everybody works together, isn't it?
Yeah.
People don't have these barriers when they certainly reach a certain age. They still need educating.
And as an action from this, I will circulate the paragraph from the devolution agreement, so that you can see what we're required to do.
And do you mind if I just ask a question? Sorry. It's all right.
I'm just slightly aware of time.
I can raise any further questions. The only major one was the next steps, and whether we are being expected in Peterborough to do our own local skills action plan, because it sort of infers that under next steps, but the wording of it was a little bit obtuse, and I couldn't make up my mind what it meant.
So a number of districts are taking forward individual plans aligned to the main strategy, and wherever districts are able to do that, then I think it would be beneficial.
Because we aren't a district. And
No.
that's the thing that concerned me, because I thought, is it just the districts in the county council? What
Or it
about
should be,
Peterborough?
yeah. No, that's a
so
fair
if we want
comment.
one from Peterborough, then we need to tell them, because I don't think one has been prepared as yet.
No, and this is just how we go about implementing. So it's not expecting anybody to have taken anything forward in this document yet. It's just a proposal. If we are to make the strategy
It's
as
a good
suggest,
idea.
how best
Yes,
to take it forward.
There was a date in it of April 23. I thought, heavens, that's a bit close.
Yeah, and so therefore, let's work together to
Absolutely.
set the
Yes.
right timelines.
Right, thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Now, Peter, and then I think we probably need
Thank
to
you,
move to a vote
and sorry,
fairly
Chair, but
quickly.
I'll have to drop just before 12 o'clock.
So we need to vote on this before you leave.
Right. And so very quickly, first of all, a bit of a shout out for Agritech, which is there in the plan. I'm biased because I work in Agritech, so I'm very pleased to see it there. Thank you. But a serious point, I think, especially for Fenland, I think Agritech has got real opportunities for the Fenland area. And the second one was, it's kind of in here, Fliss, but the SME focus, one of the things I found with my South Cams business hat on is that SMEs don't have the resources and the time always to reach out. We should always think about them in here. It's kind of there, but maybe not so explicit. Thanks.
Thank you. Noted.
Lovely. Thank you all very much for your comments. I think that it is important to have the implementation plan and that we agree it, but I think it's also, I think Fliss's point about this being a working document that actually will continue to be revised and reviewed as many other things, including governance, that the whole of the CPCA change around it. But if we wait for a time when everything is the same, we'll never do it. So thank you very much for what actually I think is a very comprehensive and thorough document, and will give us a good starting place. I think there are obviously always things that can be changed and improved, but as a starting point for us on this work, I think it's a really helpful position to be in. So can I see all those in favour of... Sorry, we will get a proposer and a seconder. So if I take Peter as a proposer and Liz as a seconder. Yeah. I'm sure that we will continue to review it and bring it back. In which case, can we all indicate to show that we're in favour of approving the draft Employment and Skills Strategy Implementation Plan? And I think, did you say you were in favour, Lynn, as well? Yeah, lovely. Is that also unanimous then? Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. Okay, thank you very much. I think we are about to lose Peter, so therefore the meeting will now not be quorate. But I think that the other reports that we have are for noting, and it would be helpful to have those reports. So we will continue, if that's okay. Thank you all. Thank you, Peter. And apologies that we haven't got everything done before you have to leave us. Right, the next item on the agenda is, I believe, a summary, the summary of the Employment and Skills Board meeting. So, Fliss.
Yeah, this one will be very short, as always. So the last meeting of the Employment and Skills Board was held on the 12th of July, and 12 members were in attendance. We received a number of really useful reports and presentations. So Martin Lawrence came and presented to us about the North Cambridgeshire Training Centre, and I do think it would be useful for us, perhaps part of a wider paper coming forward to the Skills Committee, so that you can have sight of the courses that are being taken forward there. Parminder also talked around the new AEB commissioning cycle and how that was being taken forward, along with the plans that you've seen today for the Multiply programme. You'll be aware that there's emerging data from the census, and so therefore we received information from Cambridgeshire Insight, and that will be a standing item going forward. And likewise, this committee, as soon as more relevant information, will have that information brought forward in the Insight report scheduled at a further date. And then, as part of our work around the Careers Hub, there will be a subgroup of the Employment and Skills Board focusing on careers and the delivery of the Careers and Enterprise Company contract. And proposals were well received there, and that will come forward again at a future committee date here. And subsequently as well, also looking at T-levels and T-level provision across the combined authority area. And it is an advisory board for this committee here, and so therefore we will bring a paper to this committee. I think it's next committee, looking at technical education more broadly as well. So we received some good discussion, both because there's employers and providers and some government agencies on there too. So useful discussion.
Thank you. Any comments? No comments on that report. Thank you very much, Fliss. It's important to have it and to hear that those meetings are continuing. And then possibly almost our final report, which is the budget and performance report. I think Julia is not able to be with us, so we've got John, which is always a pleasure. Hello, John.
Thank you very much, Jane, and good morning. I think just or possibly good afternoon, members. So this paper provides what's expected to be the final outturn position against the skills budget for the 2021-22 financial year, although it is still subject to audit, and the auditors are planning to do their work in November. So it is potentially still subject to change. But these figures were used to calculate any unspent budgets that will need to be carried forward into the new financial year, and the Combined Authority Board approved carry forwards at their July board meeting, and the 2022-23 budgets have been updated to reflect those carry forward decisions. So as you be aware from previous discussions, there are two main areas of underspend, one being adult education budget. See, this is a ring-fenced budget, so underspends will be carried forward in the reserves of the combined authority to be used for future delivery. And as has been detailed in previous papers, and under paragraph 3.4, there's a lot of activity going on within the programme to increase delivery, including to increase the number of training providers. And Parminder has been through that in an earlier agenda item this morning. The other significant variance is in the digital skills bootcamp budget. Again, there's some discussion about that in an earlier paper, but this line reflects the MOU agreed with DFE, and again pushing activity into the new financial year. The updated New Year budget is shown in the table underneath paragraph 3.6, and we will be reporting actuals against those figures in future board reports. And in Appendix 1, we've got the performance dashboard and a summary of the RAG status of each of the skills projects, but I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Liz. Oh, and then Andy.
Sorry, it's not
fine.
a question. I wanted just to say a bit of good news. Yeah? So on page 139, WEA are now a presence in Soham. They're going to start their courses in November and are just about to start discussions with Littleport as well. So, you know, good bit of news. Very good on the ground. Lots of local support.
Wonderful. Thank you. Andy.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the question came from the Oversight and Scrutiny Committee, considering the particular financial situation that we're facing and whether these underspends that we currently can retain, whether that's likely to continue. And the concern really is that if the financial situation in the government gets more difficult, that these sort of things are going to be vulnerable to being taken out of our budget and returned back to central government. So that's the general thrust of the question. Thank you.
I'll read the formal answer, and then if John wants to add anything, he's very welcome to. So the formal response is that the AEB budget is a devolved and ring-fenced budget. So this is not at risk of clawback. Other programmes are based on performance, and therefore either funds will only be received on delivery, or where funds have been received already, clawback is a possibility. Any provision for clawback will usually be set out in the grant funding terms and conditions, so it will depend. John, is there anything you want to add to that?
No, I think that's accurate. Obviously, we are watching the financial position very closely at the moment, and yeah, very aware that there's a tightening of the financial position within the combined authority and more widely. So yeah, we're all always sort of conscious of that, but usually, as the chair said, that these risks are highlighted in the terms and conditions of the grant awards. So yeah, we're obviously very mindful of that. But, thank you.
And I think it is just worth noting on that as has come out in a number of our discussions today, particularly about the multiply fund and other things, that actually we shouldn't necessarily think that handing money back to government, I mean, sometimes it's a real shame because we haven't been able to spend the money, and it would be good to spend the money, but at least we have had the opportunity to do that. We've done our best to do it. If we don't succeed, then actually it's probably quite sensible for it to go back and then be recycled into other areas of government spending. So I think that it's important that as a combined authority, we're not too frightened to take money on the basis that we will try and spend it. And if we don't succeed in spending it, we may have to give it back, but that's not in itself the end of the world. And I think it's quite important, particularly in this current time when we seem to get money on very short funding timescales, to just be aware that that's a risk we might need to be prepared for. Any further questions? Lynn?
Just one comment, and this is only a comment, that I was delighted to see that all the skills projects have a rank status of either green or amber, and in particular the university, because I was worrying about it being red for the last 3 meetings, if you recall.
Indeed, absolutely. Good news. Fliss, do you want to make a comment on that?
Likewise, I'm equally delighted, so thank you for the comment.
Lovely. I don't see any further questions on this report. Obviously, I think that we do need to be keeping a really close eye on the underspends for this coming year, and I'm going to suggest that actually as a committee we have potentially slightly more frequent updates on how we're doing financially. It's been, the previous 2 years with the pandemic and kind of huge, the pandemic had a massive impact on adult education and apprenticeships and all sorts of our work. But now that the impact of the pandemic ought to be falling out of the way in which we are providing our services, I think it's really crucial to be checking on how we are doing on delivery quite frequently. So we will, I'm sure, get another update before very long, but I think many of us may be taking an interest before that, so that's fine. Lovely. Thank you very much for joining us, John. Very good of you to be with us. I think that was also just for noting. So we have noted that, and we will come to what is really our final item on the agenda, which is the Skills Committee agenda plan. So the next formal meeting is due on the 7th of November, and I think that's all clear. We may meet before that informally. Andy.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's really a concern of having received the GrowthWorks reports just this morning. I haven't had a chance really to read them, and I'm no doubt that the Oversight and Scrutiny Committee would like to make comment to this committee. Is it possible to have that on the agenda for the next meeting, please?
That seems a reasonable request. We can certainly look at it and see whether we can fit it in.
So we do bring reports back on GrowthWorks, I think every quarter. Yeah, so there should be, well, that's what I'm just pondering. So there should be one on the next meeting anyway. I'm just looking through. I'm not sure it's on there. If it's not, it should be.
Thank you, Fliss. That's very helpful. Okay. Any other comments on the agenda plan? Okay. Thank you all very much for your time this morning and for a very positive meeting in lots of ways. Thank you.